Good morning, everyone. We're awfully glad you're here, and hope that we provide you a good start to your day. I want to thank the panelists that we have here today for being here. They have a vast array of experiences leveraging the cloud to the purposes of governments. And I want to get right to the start of the panel by asking a broad question. Governments are embracing cloud around the world, and they're using cloud to leverage service delivery and transform service delivery and operations. What initiatives does your government, I want to ask each of you, what initiatives does your government have in place right now, and how have those initiatives transformed the way you're doing things? Why don't we start at the end, Wade?
Great, so thank you very much. So in Canada, I'm going to talk about two initiatives that we have which directly support cloud. The first is about 3.5 years ago, we formed a super IT organization within the Government of Canada. We amalgamated and appropriated all of the IT resources of the largest departments within the federal government to create a Shared Services Canada organization. This organization is about 5,000 people, about $2 billion worth of expenditures, and is effectively an infrastructure as a service type organization. We've appropriated all of the data centers, the networking, email systems, and security associated with that. The mandate of the organization is to take the 500 to 600 data centers which we have in the Government of Canada and consolidate those into 4 or 5 enterprise-grade data centers, to consolidate the 63 email systems that we're running into a single email system with 450,000 users, the 50 wide area networks down to a single network, the 450,000 legacy phone lines we have to voice over IP, and the list goes on and on. Really, the initiative here is to create a private cloud and to improve security and reduce costs for the government. Now, how that relates to cloud is it's actually a different business model for the departments involved. Departments now need to understand how to work with an external provider, be it is a government department, and to get into the mode of actually thinking more about the applications and the business lines that they're supporting as opposed to the maintenance of infrastructure. So thereby we're actually creating, I think, the conditions within the government to enable further advances within and adoption of commercial cloud type solutions. The second thing that I'll talk about is the development of a cloud adoption strategy. Provinces and territories, municipalities are also stretched in terms of costs of running IT, legacy systems, and security challenges. So with our Public Service CIO Council representing CIOs from across the country, the Government of Canada is leading a cloud adoption strategy paper which has the process that we're using is to engage industry. So we've launched an RFI. We had about 67 respondents who provided written advice to the Government of Canada, shared with provinces and municipalities. And that's led to 64 one-on-one meetings with industry to provide Canada with the advice that we need as we adopt this new business model. So ultimately, what this is going to lead to is a private cloud for those government services that we feel that we must at this time retain internally, plus the ability to go to the commercial cloud when that makes sense and where that is the right solution for us.
Thank you. Can you, Cheow, tell us a little bit about what you're doing in Singapore?
Yeah, I think what I'll do is literally just elaborate more about what I said yesterday, which is the fact that we actually run a hybrid cloud model. We've been doing that for the last probably 3 years now. And the default position is that all unclassified data or unclassified content should go to the commercial cloud, and all classified data goes to the government cloud, basically. So it's a very simple strategy. It's worked very well for us because cost has gone down significantly. And the good thing about the commercial cloud is not just about the government, it's about this collaboration with a larger ecosystem, which is the myriad of smaller organizations that we continue to work with today. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later on, but that's just as important because it's not just about the government, it's really about the whole ecosystem that can feed into a cloud-based structure and share the data, which makes it a lot more powerful. So going forward, I think the position is very clear. Digital and cloud is really two sides of a coin. They have to work together. And I think like what I said yesterday, this year, I think we'll dedicate about 25% of our budget on digital and cloud computing, which is a tremendous increase from the last couple of years. So I think there's a bright future for cloud across the world, especially in Singapore.
Liam, how about the UK?
So in the UK, one of the principal objectives we had in the last Parliament was to reduce cost, and as part of the 1.3 billion pounds we saved in 2013, 2014, cloud and the ability to spin up solutions quickly was the fundamental driver for us at that point. If you're building a digital government, you've got to be able to move at pace and you've got to move quickly. And if you are tied up with security or with having to continually buy and commission capital-based services, it's very difficult to get moving at speed and to meet the user needs, which we're trying to address so quickly. So we took a very similar approach to Singapore in terms of cloud-first policy. To do that, we had to rationalize our security policy, which meant that 95% of what we do at government is at a lower security level. And that stuff should be in a public cloud. It should be looked after properly, it should be done properly, but it should be, and the costs and the economies are to do that in the commercial space. And then the next part is we launched a thing called the G Cloud, which was a way of introducing smaller businesses and innovative businesses and new businesses into our supplier ecosystem, which meant we could get innovation quickly. It meant that we also created economic growth, and we moved from a situation of having a small number of very large organizations working with us to a large number of large and small organizations working with us, which gives us pace, it gives us speed, and it gives us the ability to innovate. And with those three things, we can then start building a digital government.
Thank you. Tony, you and I didn't overlap in government, but in my experience, technology had its ups and downs. I lived through the near fatal birth of healthcare.gov. But tell me about what's happening in the United States government right now under your watch.
Well, it's pretty exciting, excuse me, from my perspective. Virtually every agency has adopted cloud in some form or fashion, whether it's infrastructure, platform, or whatever. And that's exciting to see, and I'm starting to see really good momentum there. We have our digital services teams that are helping agencies modernize their applications, especially where it's high impact, citizen-facing kinds of websites. But I want to pick up on something that was said here. What I'm most excited about is our ability, using cloud, to get speed in the game, to develop something faster and deliver something much faster than we ever have before. And that's really where I want to spend most of my time in this area, is how do we really accelerate the pace of adoption and pace of change. We're just in a much faster moving world now, and using traditional tools is just not going to get us there. So that's where we're going to focus. I call it landing the plane, and just making sure that we're delivering every single day faster and faster and faster.
Hard to hear.
I'm going to come right back to you, Tony. The U.S. was first out of the gate adopting a cloud-first strategy, and it's evolved now from the initial 25-point IT plan. Can you tell us, from where it started, where it is now, and also any lessons learned for other governments that are at earlier stages, or even just thinking about adopting cloud first?
Well, sure, and I think the lessons I've picked up are, it's like the old joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? It's practice, practice, practice. And I think the journey to the cloud is practice, practice, practice at first. And so you need to start with, people who are willing to, take some chances, do things a little bit differently than the way they've been doing them, build up the muscle and build up the expertise, not only inside the agencies, but with the whole supply chain that you work with. And when you practice that and develop that muscle, then you can take on bigger and more aspirational sorts of projects. And we're at a point now, I think, in the US federal government where we have a rich appetite to go take on some of the biggest challenges that we have. And we have, for the most part, a good body of skill sets and other things that I think will allow us to pretty rapidly accelerate in the next couple of years. So I'm excited about that. That said, and I've talked to all the cloud companies, there's a few things missing. We need some scalable, big enterprise workflow engines and, document management, a bunch of other things like that that will scale to, federal government sort of proportions. And those things are, I think coming along. So I'm pretty excited about where we're going.
Excellent. Cheow, I wanted to ask you a little bit more in depth about the experience in Singapore. I mean, you have a unique situation there. You have a concentrated population. You have a strong relationship with your citizens. And I think that creates an ability to extend incubator resources, for example, to startups. Can you tell us a little more about that and how you've encouraged an extension of government technology influence into the population, into the private sector?
Yeah, sure, Jay. I think one of the biggest challenge for all startups is how do you prove your credibility? Government is very conservative. I mean, government don't buy from startups. That's the fact. And so what we did over the last year and a half was we started this thing called accreditation. And what accreditation does is that startups can submit for accreditation to a small group of people, and we will verify financials, business model, the product itself, the strength of the organization, the support base. By doing so, when a company gets accredited by IDA, which is the organization we put them together with, is that there's a kind of a mark of approval that says that, oh, you guys are okay, that you're not going to fail tomorrow morning. That helps a lot because then it gives confidence to the agencies and say, this company will probably be able to supply the government and do something significant with that. So that's one part of the story. The second part is that how do you generate business for these companies? Because all these companies need business. Without government business, most of them will struggle by themselves. So we have another group of people, small group of people that does this, what I call like a speed dating service, right? So every 2 months or so, we'll set up a team. We'll get 12 to 15 agencies to define a business problem. And they will come to this forum. They will present for 5 minutes each. And we'll get a bunch of companies who are related to this theme to come and also present 5 minutes each. So after the presentations are over, they go around and date themselves, try to find a match, sit down, discuss, and if it works, start doing a POC. And then if it happens, go to a pilot. And if a pilot happens, we roll out to other parts of the government. So this has worked very well because we've managed to kind of got a few of the startups going with the government very quickly. But there's only one problem. I'll give an example. One of the startups we worked with, they did a very good job. They did 2 POCs, they did a pilot, highly successful. All the agencies love them. Now they have a queue of about 35 agencies asking for their product. And the CEO of the company came to me and said, it's a problem because I've got 21 employees, and you've got 35 companies. I'll probably take like 10 years to make that happen. So scalability is a problem. And this is something we're also trying to work with, to then partner them with other bigger companies to be able to deliver. So that's what we're doing.
Excellent. Wade, you had a goal with the RFI in the cloud to develop a nationwide cloud strategy. I want to hear more about that and how Canada is transforming government at all levels. Specifically, how do commercial services or the public cloud fit into that strategy? I think we talked a little bit yesterday about web renewal and that effort. Maybe you could tell us more.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we see commercial cloud as complementing what we'll be doing in our own private cloud. So we see a position for both kinds of cloud type services. Certainly we don't subscribe to the dedicated data centers maintained by individual departments. We think that that's wasteful and just not efficient. So in the cloud consultation, we recognize that this is a new way of doing business for us. And so we've asked industry to help us with a couple of theme areas. One is on procurement. You procure cloud in a different way than you procure the traditional services. In a couple of I guess, pathfinder initiatives that we've done. We've engaged and bounced back and forth with industry around terms and conditions, et cetera, and refined those, and it's a learning experience in this regard. We've had to talk about security, and security, as somebody was telling me yesterday, security was a problem 20 years ago, and I expect security will continue to be an area of discussion 20 years from now. So it's a constant area for us to be looking at, and in this area, one of the strong feedbacks from industry is that we ought to be leveraging industry and other government work in this area as much as we can, and let's not have a built-in Canada kind of solution. So to that end, we're actually having good discussions with the U.S. government around their FedRAMP program and how possibly extending that kind of philosophy and those kinds of principles and standards into Canada will enable the playing field between the two countries to be lowered to the best level that we can, and facilitate cost-effective cross-border type commercial opportunities. So those are some of the things and themes that we'll be addressing in our transformation strategy. It's about learning and it's about trying a few things. So just a couple examples of things that we're doing in the cloud today. The first was something fairly simple, although it's business transformation that one always has to think of as the challenging part here. We procured a social media management tool. It's called Hootsuite. At the end, they were successful. And it's a cloud-based tool or a service running on Amazon Web Services. The easy part was buying it. The more difficult part is getting all of the departmental communication leads to all sign up to use something like this and to manage communications and the brand of the Government of Canada. So that was a fairly simple procurement, but we learned a lot in terms of how to go to the market and how to procure something like this. A larger thing that we're doing is our web renewal initiative. So with this, we've taken the approach again with brand management to essentially consolidate all of Government of Canada websites into a single canada.ca website. So what that means is that all departmental websites will be taken down, and although we only have 100 or so departments, we found 1,500 websites. There's probably a few more we haven't found yet, and that's the thing, is you discover these things. But in this regard, we'll have 17 themes that citizens will see as they go to our website in terms of what kind of business or what kind of interaction do you want to have with the Government of Canada. So that's a big change from the communications culture internally. From a technical side, what we wanted to do is to find the best solution for delivering web services. And it was pretty clear from the outset that going to the commercial cloud was the right way to go here. This was not something that we needed to retain within Government of Canada servers and infrastructure. It's not something that we needed to train people in any further. In terms, we were running 1,500 of them, but I would say some were run well and some not so well. So this is something we went to the market. We didn't have any preconceived views in terms of what software we would run, because guess what? We owned them all and we ran them all, and in all the different ways. And there wasn't any sort of natural selection going on there. So we went with an open kind of view. Our assessment of the security and privacy risk on this was low. So we concluded, in fact, from a national interest point of view, there wasn't really a requirement that we demand an in-Canada type solution. At the end of the day, a partnership or led by Adobe with Akamai and Amazon, the AAA Alliance has won the solution. And we were impressed right out the gate. Within 6 weeks, we had servers up and running. We had test environments. We were able to show to our communications people, this is real. This is not your IT project where you have to wait for 6 months while we do procurement and configure servers, et cetera. It was all there. In fact, I'm hearing now that we're actually ahead of schedule, not just on the technology, but on the transformation of the web content into these new containers. We've really, I think, enthused the communications teams into sort of this vision, and we're hoping to launch that later on this year. It's been a learning experience. Again, procurement was something we had to go through, and we refined our terms and conditions. And but it's as colleagues here have said, you've got to get in there and you've got to try it and you've got to introduce it and you've got to get experience with it.
Thank you. Liam, you and I were talking backstage about some of the efforts that have been undertaken in the UK. In the last Parliament, I think the strategy was called Digital by Default. One of the things that I think strikes me is that cloud has enabled national governments to become laboratories of innovation, which is, or used to be, at least in the public mind, probably a contradiction in terms. And that's a very exciting thing, I think. And Liam, just talking with you backstage, I could sense your excitement about the things that have happened already in the UK and also where you're going. If you could tell us a little bit about the cost reductions and how you achieve them through digital by default and how it's affected the workforce. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things there. And one thing just to say at the beginning is that if you go back 30 years, government was the center of innovation. And we spent 25 years outsourcing and moving everything away and making sure that the way that people worked with government was from the outside in. And actually, we now need to work in the other way. And what we've done a lot of is moving great technology leaders into government. And so we now have a really strong cadre of great technical leaders running the departments in government who are all working together because they see that as the way forward. But that was the big change, was moving towards having the capability that we have back in-house and offering a great opportunity for government to be the center of innovation. And we were hearing this then from our Canadian colleague about the government website initiative. One of the parts of digital by default was to say that instead of trying to make people go and find out where in the Department of Chairs or the Department of Fish something was, you were going to the government. And so we created GovUK, and GovUK is the single way of entering services with the government, where you can find all your information about the government. And we had 392 different websites that they had only one thing in common, and that was they had nothing in common. And so by consolidating that and creating a single place, it means that everything we have has a common brand, has a common approach, and meets the needs of the citizen. And we then spent another part of the digital by default strategy was looking at what people did when they went online. We would often find services that had been designed and they had a fantastic beginning to the service and then it dropped off. And we never saw how come that happened. Now, if you're running a web business, that's the first thing you look at is somebody using the whole service? So we created the performance platform, and the performance platform shows everybody how many people are using the service and what is happening to it. And that's one of the great tools to use, especially if you've got a group of very high expectation management individuals like politicians who want to know why is this service running slow today. We can actually produce something and show them it online as a tool to show this is how the government works. And if you go to the front door of Downing Street, there's a screen there which tells you how many people are signing on to a service at any one point. So it's that combination of data and owning your own performance data and having the situational awareness to know what's going on and having the ability to offer a common service which is designed not around the government, but is designed around the user. That is the most important thing to drive change. And that's what led, digital by default was a way of saying the services must be so good that people want to use them. Not we're going to give it to them and force people. It must be so good they want to use it. And that's a completely different way around thinking about a government. And that's why we think about everything. And the most important word is design. You've got to design your services so that they work for the citizen, not the other way around. Because if you do it the other way around, you will be irrelevant. And you will build something that will cost a lot of money that people won't use. And that's really, really at the fundamental part of our change. So that skill of design and helping civil servants understand that design is the core component of their job has been the main change, actually. It's been really, really interesting, and it's still going on.
And how about the cost reductions that you were able to achieve?
Well, so last year, I think digital was responsible for, digital and technology reforms were responsible for £1.3 billion of savings in the year. And it's been around that level now for about 2-3 years as costs we're just taking out. Simply by designing services people use, then we won't get people calling call centers.
Right.
One of the core things we discovered was that huge amounts of inbound calling was from people who were having problems with the website that wasn't working. So that one's relatively easy to fix. The next stage of what we're doing is we start to develop new platform services, so an identity assurance platform. One of the things we're going to be developing is I call it Where's My Stuff, which is all the way through government. There are issues where you say, well, what happened to my passport application, my driving license application? Where is it? What's happened to it? And the ability to have a case management mapping system that's common across government will reduce services enormously. 25% of the calls that come into our driver vehicle licensing agency are to say, where's my application? If we can help people see that, and we can, that's the way of changing the way that we do business. And that, again, strips out cost. So it's not one big thing. It's a whole series of initiatives that take away the cost. But the way they do it is by allowing users to do what they want to do, in a way for government to stop trying to do it for them. And that's how we've reduced the cost so much.
Excellent. One of the things I think advantages that cloud provides is removing undifferentiated heavy lifting from the workforce and allowing your workforce to do more high-skilled and valuable work. And I'd like each of you to give me some examples of how that's played out in your experience in government, because it's certainly the case in the private sector. Maybe Tony, you could start.
Well, I think we're actually in the early days of that. I think this digital revolution is really just starting, and I think there's some good examples already, such as the kinds of things that my colleagues here have talked about. But I think it's really just the beginning of that. And one of the things that I'm really excited about in terms of where we're going is the ability to really impact the whole ecosystem. So I was talking to a bunch of state CIOs recently. And before taking this role, I didn't have a good concept of how dependent states and local governments were on the federal government. And just like citizens, we have this really problematic way that we interface with state and local governments. It's every agency in the federal government coming at state and local governments, in this swarm of logos and interfaces and requirements and capabilities. And so one of the things they asked me is, give us some common APIs to federal services, and you could drive tremendous cost out of the whole ecosystem. And I thought, that should have been obvious, but it wasn't obvious until somebody, said, let's go tackle that. So I'm excited about those kinds of opportunities, as we go forward. And I wanted to mention one other thing too, just on costs. I've been in IT a long time, and we always have tended to use IT cost as a percent of something as sort of the yardstick of effectiveness or efficiency. And it turns out, and I've always believed this actually, that that's really the wrong measure. Somebody showed me a chart recently. In fact, I showed it in another speech I was giving. And if you look at federal government spending on cloud in the US, it looks like it's ticked up slightly. There was a big ramp up, and then it looks like it's kind of leveled off a little bit, although it's increasing, but not at the rate that it was. And you could say, well, that's terrible. It should look like this. But if you look at that metric, the dollar, and then understand that the cost of cloud computing has been going like this, and if you could, easily do the math and translate the workload that dollar spend represents, the actual adoption of cloud would look like that. And somehow we got to move away from dollars or whatever, pounds or whatever, as the measure of effectiveness there. It's really what percentage of your workload, or what is the amount of work that you're actually doing. And so I think if we look at that as the measure, both through the federal system and then the whole ecosystem that it feeds, I think you're going to see tremendous economic benefit over the next couple of years, probably bigger than any other economic influence that there is right now, maybe even greater than the price of oil.
That's quite amazing. And maybe in Singapore, what about the effect on the workforce in terms of removing the need for undifferentiated heavy lifting?
Yeah, I think one of the very interesting lessons I learned when I first took the job, which is about a year and a half ago, was that the government tried to create a digital team. They hired pretty good people, but a lot of them quit. And the reason why they quit is because when you put very good people who are involved in agile and analytics, you put them against an infrastructure that's antiquated, it's just a sure recipe for disaster. They can't do anything. They're so used to a continuous delivery, they're so used to a single DevOps environment, and all of a sudden they come in and they realize that it takes 6 months to provision the backend. So they quit. So one of the things that we did was that we started building an integrated application stack all the way from PaaS down to IaaS and building an API gateway. And by doing that, what it does is that in the last 12 months or so, we churn out about 7 or 8 apps just like that, right? Every 3 or 4 months, an app goes out. And all of a sudden, the cost went from millions of dollars to a couple $100,000 per app. So people stood up and take notice that, it's not just about the people, right? Because if you don't have the right environment and the operating environment for this, it's just not going to work, because people don't want to deal with bare metal anymore. Bare metal is it's not something you want to deal with, because that's not where the creative process is. That's where not the innovation is. So cloud makes a lot of sense. Whether it's public cloud or private cloud, it makes a lot of sense because it takes away a lot of these friction again, in doing proper applications, doing innovation, and focus the people on doing something that matters. And let the experts do what they do best, which is people like AWS, right? Do their stuff and do it well, and we do our stuff and do it well. So basically, the roles became clearer. And I think that helped a lot going forward. Yeah.
Earlier, Wade talked about security was an issue 20 years ago, and it'll be an issue 20 years into the future. And I wanted to ask sort of broadly, and whoever wants to jump in can, about whether have you or are you developing government-wide security evaluation and certification frameworks, and where are you in that process, and what lessons have you learned out of it? I don't know if anybody wants to start.
I mean, we've spent quite a lot of time over the last 4 years making our security board. We rationalized it. So we realized that 95–98% of what governments do is quite acceptable to run at a level we called official, which is it can be used in a public arena. 5% of what we do isn't, and we're very clear to make sure that we look after that. And that change and the ability to run certification and the whole way that you focus on your security led to us being able to identify really what people needed to do, how to use it and to do it properly, rather than to be run by a set of rules against which you ticked it off against. And having proper, effective security management was what we needed, not meeting a bureaucratic set of lists. And that gave us a tremendous amount of freedom to be able to spin up services quickly. And we've always talked today about pace and how pace is the most important thing. And rather like we develop stuff in open source because we can do it quicker, developing stuff where you can spin things up on a server which you can buy on a credit card means you can do things quicker, and if you get things done more quickly, you can focus on the really important parts of the job, which is the design and the introduction of services which meet user needs. And that's really, really important. The other side of it was that it allows us a common framework to create, as we were talking about APIs, government needs to work in a way that you have an economy of APIs that we offer out in a measured way, but also that we share between ourselves. Offering out enables people to say, if you want to get a zip car or a hire car, why are we spending all this time having huge amounts of paper going past? People can see my driver license online. They can see that. If I give permission, they can see how many points I've got. They can see everything. And that's the way of generating new business, new economy, without the friction. And that's where this whole change of the mindset of security around making it an enabler as opposed to a barrier has made a huge difference to us. And the cost changes are huge. If we have an economy of APIs, we don't need to build a new ministry. People were saying once, I remember 5 years ago, they said we should have a ministry for older people where we put healthcare and pensions and local authorities, social care together in one big new building. Well, you shouldn't do that. You should use APIs to get the same result from the people that you have in place at the moment. And that's another area of cost reduction and the removal of friction, which means that government actually becomes a relevant service, not something which is just government for government's sake.
Any other experiences in security, Tony?
Well, I want to take this one on, and I think there's a fundamental design issue here that actually has to be addressed. I've talked about the efforts that most CIOs have to engage in today as sort of and this is, I'm talking about now more traditional infrastructure and applications, but I've made the analogy, it's kind of like trying to put airbags on a 65 Mustang. It's theoretically possible, but nobody's going to like, the result, and it's just not, and it wasn't an inherent part of the design. But if you take a modern Mustang or a GM car or any other brand where airbags were built into the design, it not only works better, but it's an aesthetically pleasing experience and so on. And today, our architectural paradigms in IT don't have security built into the design at every single level. It has to be added on or glued on somehow after the fact. And in the end, that is going to fail. And so I think the whole tech industry has to embrace a model that is secure by design. It's built into the compilers, it's built into the hardware, it's built into the networking, it's built into storage, can all connect together in a sort of seamless way, and what you get at the end is, a platform that gives you security by design, not security slapped on afterwards. And so I think this is a great area for some good experimentation and good entrepreneurs and good investment in the technology industry.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Tony a lot about this, because I think one of the biggest security threats to government today is the fragmentation of the way we look at infrastructure, the way we look at networks, we look at applications, etc. And I think part of this is really how do you build it together really by design, not as an afterthought. Because today, security is an afterthought, right? You do everything and then you do a pen test and you say, hooray, it's great. But that's not the point. The point is that if you don't design it with security in mind from day one, things will happen. And things always happen. I mean, that's what government faces today. And it's something that is really, again, a mindset change, significant mindset change. And the government has to take the lead, because to pull the industry together to make this something that we can all subscribe to going forward.
We've, in the comments here, occasionally talked a little bit about what the future might look like. Tony's powerful statement about the cost factors related to tech and cloud and its transformational nature having an impact that's greater than potentially the cost of oil. The need to embed security into our systems instead of gluing it on. I wanted to ask, as we're wrapping up here, a sort of broader question about where you see cloud technology and its uses by government 5 years into the future from where it is now. And I know 5 years is a long time. 5 years ago, cloud and government was kind of a radical idea, and now it's becoming the norm around the world. But if anybody wants to take on, predict, get out their crystal ball and predict what this might look like, maybe with your successors 5 years from now, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I'll start then. I think we've sort of set out our agenda for the next 5 years with the creation of Shared Services Canada and our private cloud. So very much supporting the benefits that come from cloud and looking to free up capacity so that we can focus on the renewal of our legacy system. So, certainly what I would like to see 5 years from now is that we have an active program to rejuvenate and replace our 30-year-old systems that are holding us back in terms of delivering greater services. I'd like to see in Canada a cloud ecosystem that supports provinces, municipalities, and the federal government with shared procurement vehicles, common security standards, and stronger interoperability between data sets. One of our big challenges right now with the kind of environments that we run in is really just sharing data. It's a problem within the federal government in terms of the silos that we have, and it's certainly a problem between provinces, municipalities, and the federal government. So putting in place the ecosystem there that will allow for things like the Canadian digital interchange, where we can interchange identity-related elements between governments and levels of government, eliminating passwords. So a credentialing system that is actually secure, because one of the key vectors in terms of the security compromises that we have are lost passwords or compromised passwords and usernames, and introducing a broad national-based credentialing system, I think, will really help accelerate the introduction of the kind of services that our citizens are looking for, and I think cloud will play an important part in that.
4 years and 10 months, Liam? Oh, wait, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think Teresa mentioned the fact that cloud is the new normal, and I think we're past that point. There's really no turning back, right? The challenge then, as we keep mentioning, is about security. We talk about a more secure build. We talk about the ability to exchange data in a more transparent manner. Now, I think these things will just keep improving, and the fact is that there'll be no more excuse to take 2 years to develop an application. The demands are going to keep increasing. We'll be talking in terms of weeks and months rather than years and decades, basically. But I think the thing that's going to hold us back is that unless and until we can deal with some of the legacy platforms that we all straddle with, that's going to be the big challenge going forward for us. And there has to be a better way to do it.
Liam?
I think there's three things I'd say, and then there's one example I'll give you. The first thing I'd say is that one of the most refreshing things we had, the head of the British Civil Service said that all services should be browser-based and browser-agnostic, which is an enormous sort of peg to hang policy on, but means in very rational terms that we're going to have to use effective cloud services to deliver what we do. And we do that already. It's one of the things, if you look at the way we transformed all the technology and central government departments for desktop and collaboration over the last year, that's been a huge change in people's lives, and it's changed the way that even officials work with us. My favorite quote being one of the officials saying, at last they've given us something that isn't crap. Which, that's a good start. But part of it is I think the ability for us now to move towards a platform-based view of what we're doing, and the creation of what we're doing at the moment now, which is called government as a platform, where you have a common, say, where's my stuff platform, you have a common performance platform, a common web platform. The exciting one in there, the one I've always found exciting, is the common identity assurance platform, which we call Verify, which is a completely different way of doing things. Faced with needing an ID card, we said we don't need an ID card. What we need is to be able to identify ourselves online, and Verify is a way. It's a market of providers. So it's not just one company checking at you and working you out. You can choose from a market of identity providers. They will then vouch for you as you go into government systems. And that's great. That's really smooth for us. Resolves one component of everything across government. But what it also does is it resolves one component of everything across the whole industry. And we're not going to push this on people, but I see that as one of the most subversive things the government has ever done. And it will change the way government works. It will change the way our industry works, because its fundamental idea is to remove friction. And And it's in 5 years' time, you'll look back and you'll go, government works faster, spins things up faster, and it's focused on removing friction. And that's, I think, the change we'll see.
Tony, 2020?
If you think about what government does, in addition to all the sort of, paper shuffling things and so on that we do today, most governments are tremendous sponsors of research and sponsors of things that, might not be commercially viable, but then lead to good commercial outcomes. And so with this vast amount of compute power that we have with the cloud, and the way it's increasing and the way we can harness it, I think we're going to fundamentally revolutionize the way we think about certain things in science, medicine, health, across a pretty wide environment, just to mention a few. And I'm really excited about the possibility for how we can apply this compute resource to some of those heretofore really hard problems. And I think that's where we're going to see the biggest difference.
Well, thank you all very much. This has been a terrific panel, and it's wonderful to see the impact that the revolution we've seen that's come about because of cloud technology and what it's done in government and where it's headed. I want to thank our 4 panelists for their service and for joining us here today, and thank you all for coming.